Okay, thanks for coming in, guys.
This means tonight's meeting's only gonna last like 45 minutes.
That's the idea, right? That's what I'm planning on.
We don't like those sorts of predictions. They're
Yeah.
very dangerous. Let's start by looking at the big picture, the spreadsheet called Historical Levy and Spending. It shows the general fund spending, the property tax levy, and then the pieces that make up the property tax levy. So this is our first draft of the whole thing put together. There's a lot of things yet to be changed, but you can see the 2020 levy is at just under 5%, at just over $1 million. And the general fund spending is up just a little bit more than 3%. I don't think there's much we need to talk about here. This is just a picture of where we're at. We can start drilling down and looking at the pieces that make this up, and there'll be more talk about that, unless anybody has any questions.
Well, this is where we get into the requisite parts that define those numbers. So,
Let's dig into the next spreadsheet then, which is called, well, it says 2019 draft, but it's 2020 draft budget and spending history, dated the 23rd of August. Now you can see where all of the individual department numbers are at in terms of the 2020 budget as compared to this year's budget and the actual expenses from 2013 to 2018. You can also see the proposed 2020 revenues, non-levy revenues in that column, and then the calculation that shows where the property taxes are going towards.
so this is how you calculate that $1,005,000.
That's where it comes from. So it's not as easy to say the buildings are going to spend $111,000 and make $61,000, so they need $50,000 in property tax levy, because some of the revenues that we have are a little more general than that, like local government aid. They're not allocated out to some of these departments. But this is just a way for us to see where all the pieces come together. I don't think there's much to dig into here without having the department heads come and report on their individual budgets. But some of the bigger pieces that really do make an effect on this are worth noting. The rec park, of course, is a major component of our budget. You can see the 2020 expense piece of it is up to about $724,000 from $708,000. So that's 2% increase. The revenue side is at $1,215,000. It was $1,180,000 in 2019 was the budget. We're probably going to make $1,200,000 in 2019. So there's a significant chunk there that is writing down property taxes. You can see right now that's almost $500,000 in revenues that we're using to write down property taxes.
And this is a prediction. The 491 is a prediction for 2020. That's not what it's going to look like for 2019. We don't know those numbers.
We think in 2019 we're going to make about $1,200,000.
Right.
And we think that we'll probably clear close to that amount in terms of.
Okay.
Now that $723,000 in expenses, you can see that the numbers kind of vary wildly in what the actuals are, because a big piece of that, $135,000 of that, is capital set aside. So it's what we contribute from the expense budget towards capital projects every year. We don't spend it every year. Sometimes we spend a lot more than that. We need to set it aside if we ever want to do some of the major projects down there that we're forced to do from time to time, like bathhouse reconstruction and park office and site reconstruction and things like that. So there is already a lot of money set aside in the expense for that. The rest of that overage, we put some of it in the special projects line item as an expense, just so that we don't count on every dollar of it to write down property taxes. And then if we don't get it, for some reason there's a down year, then, you know, we'd be short on the expense side. So it's a lot more tight than it used to be in terms of how much of that expected revenue we're actually putting into the budget. This is all that we're expecting now, but we're also trying to add a little cushion on the expense side just in case we don't make what we want. And then when we do hit our number or exceed it, like we've generally done, we can talk about where to put that extra money.
So when are we going to see Dave's budget for all the parts of it, parks and
Hopefully
the harbor and the golf course?
Next week, if we can work that schedule out, to do this Wednesday evening next week, before we do the 6 o'clock meeting,
Okay.
that Dave's on vacation this week, so we'll look at park and golf budget next week if we can, and then the following week, we're going to look at the streets budget.
I just had a simple question, maybe it's not a simple question, but a question regarding the golf course and the revenues for the golf course. And since we haven't seen Dave's budget, you know, the revenues for 2020 are forecast or projected at $113,000. Where does that fit in comparison to where we've been, you know, previous years?
It's lower,
Is it?
but not lower than last year. It's probably about what we'll make this year, we think, but we're not sure yet. There's still a lot of season left. We don't have final bonus numbers. We don't know what we're going to do in September. So if we look at how much we've made plus how much we made last year and the time remaining, we can get an estimate around this number.
Mhm.
I think the golf budget is still fairly conservative on both sides. So the expenses are, although we can't really figure out where we would cut them, the number is higher than we've spent in the past. So I think that, you know, that there's no risk of it being more than that. And then with the revenues, you really can't say, obviously, but this is still on the low end of our expected range. One of the things that we know will change between this draft and the future drafts are there's still some merchandise built into that 213 number that we haven't really been doing. We haven't been buying clothes to sell in the clubhouse, for instance. And it's not in the 113 number on the revenue side of this.
Because you don't know what that would be, right?
Well, we're not selling it, so we didn't put it in the revenue side.
Right.
But there is still some in the expense side. So I think there's some fine tuning we still need to do that'll probably get in our favor on that budget.
And we'll see the details of that when we get
Yeah,
get
we'll look at the line
Dave's
items.
budget and see that, okay.
Yeah.
So if I'm reading that golf line item properly, then what we're predicting for 2020 is that we're going to have a $100,000 subsidy for the golf course, basically.
That's what's here now. I don't think it's going to end up being that high, but that's
Right.
what we've got at our first draft.
All right, so that's kind of one of the more classic numbers we have here. Like
It's
that.
one that we still need to do some work on. Yeah.
Okay.
The other side of it is the park board hasn't talked about rates next year yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of our conversation when Dave and Paul are here is to talk about what we're hoping to get from the revenues in this and whether we need to have the park board look at the rates in a particular way. The other piece that's in here worth noting is the YMCA budget at 131,250 is 5% more than 125. This is obviously up in the air. I think based on our initial conversations with the county, we weren't planning on making changes to any of those contracts that would affect the 2020 budget timeline because we didn't think we'd be done in time. And of course, here we are setting preliminary levies and we haven't finished those conversations. So it's probably okay to leave this in here for now, but as we look ahead into the future, this, the law enforcement, the streets, those are all areas that are kind of open for movement in unpredictable ways. Not for 2020, but for the years following that.
I feel like we had that same conversation when we did the 19 budget with putting that number in there to be safe.
We had it in there.
That's what we
But we paid.
We started it at 140, I think, in the preliminary 19, and we
That's
brought
what
it down
they
to
wanted.
125. And because that's the state of our conversation.
Mhm.
So we'll that's a good spot for it to be right now. We don't need to make any changes to it.
That's
But
the
it's-
stated agreement, so that's where we're at.
The library budget's approved, so that's actually a piece of this that's done. The debt service is a fixed number. You can see the total payments are significantly more than the amount that we're going to be including in the property tax levy. A lot of our debt service is paying for utility reconstructions when we use utility revenues to pay for it. Special projects is in at 100. We'll talk a little bit about where that is in comparison to our predictions when we get to that sheet.
Yeah, that's one I think we have to have some conversations on that, about what that means and getting down.
And then the liquor and water, sewer, and electric, they're not really in the budget yet. Those numbers are in there as just taking up space right now. None of those affect the levy in a direct way. The liquor does include a $200,000 contribution that writes down property taxes. They also include a rent payment for the building that's included in the revenues on the building line item. Those items they're discretionary. They're not based on what the actual results are. The liquor has its own fund that takes the additional monies in, and right now it's got over $1 million in it. It's slated for future projects, which we'll also look at in a little bit.
So when will we see the liquor store budget then?
We'll probably look at that later in the fall or winter, since it's not something you need to have before the preliminary levy. We'll look at it in late September, October.
What does the liquor store pay for rent?
About,
$3,000 a month.
I'd say
I think
36,000
it's more
seems
about
about right.
3,500 a month.
Which is actually pretty cheap for a business of their numbers.
Yeah, but it's also ours,
Yeah.
in our building.
Yeah.
Which is kind of silly, yeah. But
Well, it's
I mean,
just, it's accounting is all it is.
Yeah.
Right, it's a revenue producing enterprise of the city, and obviously if they have money coming in, they should be paying the fair amount for the cost of that building that they're using,
Right.
so.
And rather
Well,
than
and-
just take it all as a contribution, actually showing it on their books as a building expense is a good way for us to keep in mind there is an expense to having a liquor store. We wouldn't need that space if they weren't here. So, just helps us keep track of it. More questions at this level, or we can start talking about some of the other looks?
Why is the golf in two spots? Oh, no, never mind, got it.
Yeah,
Now I just saw that it wasn't up above you.
it used to be
What was this, what was the name
Was
of
it
that switch?
an enterprise fund.
Okay.
Never made any money to
Right.
No. No, it didn't. Let's look at the multi-year analysis. '17 and '18 are finished. '19 is what we completed with the budget, so there's that. The 2020 projection is what we thought this year's budget was going to look like a year ago. So, and then the 2020 current is its existing state. The levy's a little bit higher than we had calculated a year ago. Why is that? The revenue piece of it is a little bit higher, and as we get down to the bottom line items, you'll see why that is. And then the debt piece is a little bit higher. We have it in there at 307,000. That's what it was calculating at, but it's actually 337,000. And the big picture, or the big change there is we have to collect more money in the levies than we're actually required to pay back. That's just part of the bond rules. Whenever we sell a bond, we're required to collect 5% more because we don't always get all the levy money that we levy, if you know what I mean. So the bondholders want to have that extra protection. So that bit's in there. So that's a little bit higher than we expected. You can see we're missing new project debt. We had intended to have another $150,000 worth of debt payments that would be, well, City Hall basically. And that we won't have that in the 2020 budget. We do build it next year. That debt payment won't come until 2021. We were going to fund some of that additional payment with additional rec park revenues. So right now, that rec park revenue, rather than being eaten up to fund that payment, is just writing down the levy, but only by this much, 19,166. That's the difference in what we used to write down the levy in 2019 and what the current spreadsheet says we're using to write down the levy in 2020. The additional liquor revenue, we were going to increase the amount we took from liquor monies to put towards property taxes by $20,000 this year, and we haven't done that yet, so that's at zero. And then council priorities, that's the special projects line item. It was at 115, it's at 100, so we took 15 of that in, but there's 15 more that we thought we were going to. So if we took that extra money from council priorities, the extra money from liquor revenues, the additional rec park revenues, and we were 30,000 less on the debt payments, then we'd be a lot closer to where we said we were going to be and have the ability to absorb that additional debt payment, a new project payment of 150,000. So we're actually very close to what our projection was, and I think by the end of this process, we can be right on it if we want to. Or more likely, we'll have it a little bit lower, or we'll continue to put a little extra money in the special projects line item, waiting for that city council or city hall liquor store debt payment, so we don't have to increase taxes in any major way to absorb that.
So if we, by the time we decided on the final levy, brought it down to that 3.02, what happens to the 2021 and 2022 estimates? Do those go up, or is that based on?
Right now, those are based on the revenue levy piece, so the 667,301 number, which is our 2020 current levy that's going to support general fund activities, not debt payments. And at 667, it's being inflated 3% a year. That's the biggest piece of change for the 21, 22 levies, is that number going up and down 3%. So when we're making changes, say in the golf course budget, for instance, it'll either increase or decrease that 667 number, and that'll change our projections as we go into the future.
But if we talk about the total levy,
A lot of that is a function, isn't it, a function of how much we add the rec park revenue and liquor store revenues to it?
It's that the project debt is added. So if you look at, say, 2021, that $1,044,000 is 687 plus 307 plus 150 minus 50 minus 20 minus 30. So
Do we know that for 2021, 2022, that we're not going to be at 307, we're going to be at 337?
no, we don't know that. That's
We could
something that we
assume
need to
that,
tighten up as well. And, we'll look at the debt payment schedule after this to think about what those payments are and where the money's coming from. And that's another one of the real flexibility factors that we have here. There's a number of older bonds that we have that are paying for utility reconstruction that we levied property tax money to help pay back. And there might be the opportunity to use additional utility funds to do that instead of property tax money. So, none of these things are fixed. This is just a concept that says we can take on additional large payment without having significant increases in the property tax number. So we're just trying to look ahead a few years to make sure we can absorb those things and try to describe how we might do it.
I think I'm still confused, though, as whether the 3.88 is a reflection of the 4.83 or the 3.02.
It's mostly a function of that number 667. So if that 667 became 650,
Okay.
then 687 becomes 668, right?
Okay.
It's 3% more. So 670 maybe, 3% more. So that $1,044,000 is a function of that number more than the rest of them, but we also might change the debt number. We don't know what that new project debt payment's going to be yet. It could be more or less. That's still a decision we get to make. We haven't decided how much of that additional rec park revenue we're going to program into this. We haven't decided how much additional liquor revenue we have. So this is more of a description of a strategy than a absolute, this is how it's going to happen.
So as we progress, then we'll be able to refine those projected 21,
Yeah.
22 numbers, so we'll have a better idea of
It's really just an illustration to show us that what our intention is going into the future with
Right.
with a certain strategy that we could use to get to that intention.
And we did, for 2019, end up very close to what our projection was in 2017. And the same thing in 2018. We ended up very close. And so our goal using this is not only to get our 2020 current close to what our projection was last year, but also to get 2021 close to what we think we're going to be able to do as well. And 2022, the same thing. But we're still early.
Yeah, but it helps to understand that we don't have some major levy increase projected for a year or two down the line, so when we're setting the levy this year, to kind of keep things on a more level rate of increase.
Let's look at the debt payments, because this is something where there's a lot of ability to make changes to the budget based on this. So the spreadsheet's called Debt Service Analysis, dated August 23rd. And it just lists our current debt obligations. So the first thing to note is the top one, the last pay date was this year, so it's not in the budget for 2020.
I thought it was me.
Everybody's phone is
Sorry.
very busy these days. That's okay.
What is this? When did you send this one out?
They all went out together.
Maybe I missed that one. when I
Oh,
was
here.
downloading.
Take a look at it. And so just to note, its last pay date's this year. It's not in the budget. There was, this was being paid entirely by the water fund. And so there's no longer, the water fund does not have a payment anymore, but they still have the same amount of revenue to make this payment. If you look down to the 2004 PFA, the next one, that's a water replacement. That's the downtown reconstruction water loan. And right now it's being paid by special assessments and property tax levies. And we could replace that property tax levy with water revenues, either in part or in total, because this 2019 payment went away. So that's something that the Utilities Commission would need to look at when they're doing their budgets, just to be sure that they're comfortable with that. And this
So-
isn't a decision you have to make before your September meeting. If your levy ends up being even where it is right now at 4.83 in September, this is one of the avenues you'll have to look at bringing it down before December.
And so that you're looking at a total amount. Okay, so the special assessments, special assessments and levies. So that 55,287, you're saying that could be offset by revenues, not levy.
I'm saying the 34,000 that we're levying right now
Yeah.
Could be. So we would leave
could
it-
be,
we would leave the
instead that could
special
be a PUC
assessments.
contribution, because the water fund does generate enough money to pay for its reconstruction projects.
Got it. Okay. Just wanted to be clear. I knew what numbers we were talking about there, because special assessment, that I didn't know if we were gonna figured that special assessments we just keep assessing.
So one of the risk factors, if we did that, if we took that payment from the water fund, is that they couldn't use that to pay for a new project. But note that the last payment for that is 2024. And when we're looking at new projects for water and sewer, we're talking about First Street and Fifth Avenue West are the next two then we'll get to that schedule as well to look at that. That's the next time we're intending to borrow money that water and sewer revenues will pay back. And if 2024 is the time this payment goes away, if we do that project in 2023, for instance, and we borrow money then, the timing works out perfectly. This payment goes away as well, and it can be used to pay for those reconstruction projects. So there's really not a lot of risk in taking those water revenues and putting it towards this payment instead of using property taxes. Then skip down, you can see the rest of those last paydays go out quite a bit, except for two of them, and they're the electric ones. So one of those, the $199,000 payment, which is the top one of those two, 212A, its last pay date is 2023. That is the power plant construction bond,
Okay.
and we'll be done paying for that in 2023.
Hmm.
We'll still be under contract with SIMPA to provide the capacity of that plant onto their system, and although that's not a sure thing forever, SIMPA's looking at that continuing at least through the 2020s. And as they do their planning, we'll know more about what their intentions are, but there's not a big risk of that going away. So the electric fund in after 2023, we'll be taking some of that money that we're using to pay debt and accumulate it in a fund that we'll use to pay for improvements that we'll need to make to the plant, because it is 20 years old, and there will be more major work that needs to be done to it. The other bond, 2013B, the $130,000 payment, is a combination of bonds that the electric fund used to basically reconstruct 85% of their distribution system in 2007. So most of our distribution system is relatively new. It's all in excellent condition, and they'll be done paying for that in 2023. At that point, we're looking at, $330,000 of electric revenues that they won't need all of to make debt payments. So some of that will be accumulating so they can pay cash for projects. Some of that they may use for rate relief. Some of that, however, we might want to look at bringing into the general fund. So one of the things that we learned working with SIMPA is they did an analysis of everybody's factors the same way that SIMPA's financial advisor looks at SIMPA's financial factors and tries to figure out what are the things that bond rating agencies look at and care about. And days liquidity in cash, your debt ratio versus other things, how much money do you have set aside for capital projects, all those things that they did an analysis for SIMPA as an organization, but they also looked at all the member cities. And one of the things they looked at was what is the percentage of revenues that the member cities are contributing as payment in lieu of taxes. And the rating agencies expected that to be about 5%. That was what they thought was a number that made sense and wouldn't be something that they would think is going to affect the bond rating. And right now we're taking 68,000 or so, which is 40,000 plus 1.5%. Probably close to 3%, 3.5% of the electric fund revenues. So we could bump that up, and 5% of the electric fund revenues would be, well, maybe it's not even 3%, because the electric fund's probably close to a $3 million operation right now. So 5% of that is $150,000, and we're making half of that, less than half of that, as a transfer payment in lieu of taxes right now. So there's some flexibility as well to help pay for some of these bigger general fund projects as they come into the future come 2023. I don't really have anything else I want to say about these bond payments.
There's not really much else to say, is there?
Well,
This is
I mean, there's other ones in here you might have questions about, but otherwise those are kind of the two worthwhile ongoing conversations related to debt payments that we'll be having.
So when we start to think about, the long term, out five years, plus, with the availability of these two sources, if you say $330,000, some of it potentially being able to be shifted to general fund, how would we think about that in terms of our overall, I guess, not just the levy, but just the city's finances and budget and that. Can you give us some ideas in terms of what that might look like? Because it's hard to just take that number and just slot it in and think that this might be some kind of relief to the city without understanding kind of how it fits in with everything else.
Well, it's, I think you should consider it as relief, as one of the options to use it for. And so this isn't any different than the rec park made more money, and we have to figure out how do we want to use that additional revenue. And property tax relief is usually one of the things that's high on the list. But the other things that end up being on the list are contributions towards important capital projects, using cash to pay for council priorities,
Well, that's what I mean. And-
looking
and
at the
how-
organization and adding services that we weren't doing in the past.
You know, how do we
That's-
balance the use of that money, relationship to tax relief?
And you have to, I mean, there's no answer to that, right? That's a conversation that's ongoing, and even when you've made a decision, it's a decision that you get to revisit at least annually. So how would you go about having that conversation? Some of the things we'll need to decide is what amount of that utilities money is it prudent to use in the general fund area and doesn't actually put any risk towards the operation of the utilities or put any significant pressure on utility rates, because we don't want to turn it into a jacking up utility rates to pay for other things. And that's not what this represents right now. Like these sorts of transfers are things that can be completely utility rate neutral right now. The other thing to think about is it a long-term available source of funding, or is it a short-term available source of funding? So for the water fund, for instance, we know that it's safe because in 2024 their next payment goes away, and so we'll have that one to take over the space of this one. So there's at least that 10-year period of time where that chunk of money is available to pay for some of their other obligations. When it comes to the electric, there's a lot of unknowns going into the future. Are we going to keep operating that power plant? I would think for another 10 years would be a pretty safe assumption, but are we going to look 30 years down the road and continue to operate it? Is Simply even interested in buying the capacity of it 30 years down the road? We don't really know. But for that next 5 years or so, I think we can be pretty sure that that money is available to help pay for things. So you wouldn't want to use all of it to write down property taxes immediately without understanding the risk that means there's a jump in property taxes when that money goes away. So that, it's going to be talked about like every other source, and we'll have to figure out what your priorities are, which capital projects you think are coming up, how we want to pay for them.
Well, it would even be helpful to know, in terms of the power plant, what kind of anticipated improvements might be necessary and what kind of costs might be involved with that, because when we do things at the power plant, it generally is significant expense, so it's not just a $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 fix. Sometimes it's more significant than that.
Oh, yeah.
So
And we've done some of those things. None of them are anticipated. So when this money becomes available, we're not making debt payments anymore, and we have to figure out how much of that do we want to keep treating like capital expense and putting aside. There is a depreciation number that's already included in the electric fund. And so we're collecting a depreciation right now, even as we're making this debt payment. And the fund is accumulating cash that is set aside for paying for those projects. And we have paid cash for every one of the projects that we've had in the 20 years we've had the plant, including a $300,000 upgrade that we were forced to make because regulations changed. So I think that they're really sitting in a very good place right now where they don't need to have a significant amount of money beyond depreciation set aside, but we will use our imagination and figure out, okay, what if the substation has an issue? There's a big ticket item that we have to have, and what amount do we want to self-insure to make sure that stuff we're able to take care of it with cash. We're also using electric fund revenues to pay for other capital projects as well. I mean, we're paying for meter replacement now, we're paying for street light work, we're paying for a lot of other things with it. So I think it's in a very healthy place to take a look at that number and increase it. But we'll put that in the multi-year analysis in some of the next versions.
okay, thanks.
Should we look at the capital improvement plan?
That's the next one I have.
Do we have to turn the monitor on too?
We're just kind of hammering through all this stuff too. If we need to slow down, then let's do that. We can revisit this stuff as well.
So, for those of you that have this in front of you, the paper might be easier to read, but right now, for our 5-year plan, we know about Highway 61. We've updated these numbers to be what we told you right after the bids we thought they were going to be. We've gotten more recent information from MnDOT where we're going to update them again. So in the next week, we'll have this.
Up or down?
The total stays the same. So it's just the source. And so maybe I already...
It looks updated.
I think though that the water number is higher than it needs to be. The electric number is one of the things we want to talk about. So that this is an issue that I don't have a lot of information for you to look at, but again, I just want to introduce it. The electric fund has the ability to pay for all the streetlight improvements in the Highway 61 project, which is $500,000 of that 2.3 that we're going to have to pay to them. That we're not programming that in right now to use all electric money to pay for. And the reason is because we had the TAP funds, and at some point we had set aside some of that to pay for streetlights. But once the amount that we're contributing is far greater than the TAP funds, it doesn't matter where the TAP funds are used anymore. And so we can use the TAP funds to pay for things that the general fund was going to pay for instead, and use electric funds to pay for all the street lighting. So there's another potential couple $100,000 that we said we were going to use general fund or street reconstruction cash for, but we can instead use electric fund cash for. And that's something that we're going to suggest and look at in our next version of this. Because right now, that's the only thing on the list where we're talking about using electric fund cash, but the electric fund has quite a bit of cash. Water and sewer, unfortunately, took a much bigger hit than we were programming on this project. We had intended to use water and sewer cash to pay for some of these projects on the list. We'll still use it for paying for the meter replacement project. The First Street reconstruction and Fifth Avenue reconstruction, we may not, because the numbers that are in Highway 61 are quite a bit higher than we were expecting to see on the water and the sewer side of things. That's where most of the increases showed up, particularly in the sewer. And although the sewer fund is healthy and the water fund is as well, we probably don't want to use $1.3 million in cash in the next 5 years on those projects. So this is something we might have to revise downward on these future ones. What our intention was, when it comes to debt, for water and sewer, was these two projects here, which is the First Street reconstruction and Fifth Avenue reconstruction, is the next time we need to actually borrow money to do water and sewer projects. We've got them written in here at 2023 right now, and I think that's about the best estimate for when the county wants to do Fifth Avenue.
And that's when we're going to have some of our bigger projects in the electric fund going on.
Unfortunately, the electric fund money isn't usable for these projects, but if we do end up having to look at some rates money going towards water and sewer, that we could have a shift where there's not as much rate money in electric and there's more water and sewer. If we have to try and figure out if there's a bigger expense in water and sewer, we can hold electric even, for instance.
And the basis for those project costs, do we have any real thought that that's a viable number?
It'd be hard to say yes to that.
I mean, throwing it in there as a placemaker, but,
We've
are you being generous, or?
First Street reconstruction is really, we haven't even scoped it yet. So, for instance, are we doing 10 blocks of reconstruction, or are we doing 16 blocks of reconstruction? I don't know. Fifth Avenue, I'm a little more solid with, although, as we've seen, these bids can come in crazy. But I can tell you that if the number we got back in the bids was what MinDOT got back, we would not move forward with that project.
Right.
We'd have to stop and rebid it and wait another year. With these projects here, other than the county one, they're on our schedule. And so if there is that kind of an issue, we can just stop and say, no, that's ridiculous, we're not spending that. Whereas with this Highway 61, those 4 blocks of sewer, we have to do it now, it's our only chance.
We still have no idea why those bids came in so high, do we?
We've been offered explanations, but none of them are, they don't make any sense.
From LHB or from MinDOT or from the
From the
contractors?
contractors. I mean, I've heard through MinDOT from the contractors that they were concerned about some of the factors like water and rock and other things. Factors that are in the budgets as line items in other places. So it's hard for me to really understand what they were concerned about. But it's neither here nor there, because when we do a line item bid, you can't pick and choose which line items you like and which
Right.
ones you don't. You have to go with the final number. So, meter replacement we don't need to talk about here because it's really not any general fund money going towards that. Highway 61 is what it is at this point. It's kind of fixed in place. City Hall Liquor Store, that's what we've got in there right now. In 3 or 4 months' time, we'll have a better number of what we think that's going to be. It's not going to be 10 times that, right? It's probably not going to be twice that. I doubt it'll be less than that. The idea is we have $1 million of liquor store money, and we'll use, that's, of their $1.3 million they have in the bank right now, we'll use most of it of cash to pay for this project, because that's why we have it. And when we have a brand new building, we don't need to have a lot of cash on hand to pay for things that might break, because it's all new. We also were talking about spending some general fund cash. We'll have to revisit that number after Highway 61, but I still think we'll be able to do that at $1 million.
And what's the actual balance in the liquor store fund right now?
I think it's like $1.3 million.
And is that something that we keep at that level just because we want to have it there, or is that something that, we're talking a couple of years here? Is that something we could throw extra money in there in the next couple of years?
Well, we don't throw, that's all the money that they make that we don't take to use for other
Okay,
purposes.
fair enough.
So as long as we keep the $200,000 contribution at $200,000, we should expect that number to grow, because they're making more money in profits than we're taking right now. And that's historically been the case, which is why there's $1.3 million in their accounts that we've been accumulating for this very project. So
when you book those numbers then, Mike, and I'm gonna assume for now that this spot gets torn down and we build something here,
Mhm.
does that take into account then what it may cost us to be off-site to find another outlet? Because obviously we're not going to just close the liquor store, but there's going to be expense related to being someplace else.
yeah, this number isn't remotely at that level of detail.
Okay,
So this is a placeholder for a concept, and we're just trying to get in the neighborhood
okay.
so we can understand what kind of potential debt is coming in the future.
Okay.
And at least then we can know, all right, if we end up having this much debt, how much per year of a payment is that going to be over whatever period of time we want? So there's so many variables in that this is just a planning tool right now. There's nothing about this that's fixed. These two happening the same year is a concept that I think is interesting to think about. We've wanted to do First Street for a while now. With Highway 61 happening, it doesn't make sense to plan on doing First Street until that's done, because First Street's going to be probably used by folks when Highway 61 is closed. And we don't want to do any work on it until after that process is over. The other thing about it is it's the same type of work that we're talking about doing on Fifth Avenue, and so there might be some economies of scale associated with doing them at the same time. But like I said, we haven't really scoped it out. So what we do know is when it comes to street and utility reconstructions, this is the one that we've had identified for some time now as the next project that needs to happen. We'll delve into that in more detail in the winter and spring when we come back and talk about capital improvement planning in the big picture scheme of things, and start thinking about other departments' capital improvement plans as well. So we can look at where is the electric department's capital improvement plan, and what does the park have on their capital improvement plan, and what should we think about at the golf course, and not just these big ones that we've been planning for a long time, but some of the smaller ones too, and get a big picture of that.
I have a question on the special assessments for that, for the street project.
Street?
Yeah,
Yes.
First Street. Are you using the same rates as we've used in the past for the special assessments, percentage of the project, or how do we come up with that $600,000?
It's an estimate. So the idea is that of that $3 million, a portion of it is paying for pavement reconstruction. And of that pavement reconstruction, a percentage of it is going to be special assessed, and a percentage of it is going to be covered by the general fund. So levy debt is paying what street reconstruction is not paying for. So between this cash and this debt, we're paying for pavement and storm sewer and curb and gutter that's not getting special assessed. And then this chunk is the piece of where we might special assess. Obviously, we haven't even decided that we are going to special assess this project. And until we've had those conversations, it's complete speculation. Until we have a budget that an engineer has created based on an actual scope of work, this again is just a concept that some portion of it will be special assessed, some portion will be paid for by cash, some portion of it will be general obligation debt, some portion of it will be revenue debt. We'll get a little practice with that at the regular meeting tonight, talking through that issue. There's really not other big ticket items that we see happening in the next 5 years. Right? Potentially not in the next 10 years, although it's time for us to revisit what's after First Street when it comes to utility and street reconstructions. We know we have other pavements that are in poor condition, and we generally want to program a project when the pavements and the utilities are both in poor condition to do reconstruction. So we may decide for some of the pavements that are in poor condition, but the utilities are okay, that we're going to talk about other strategies than reconstruction. And we may decide that after this project, we're in good shape for another 5 or 10 years. So we'll look at that in a special capital improvement session where we get to spend some more time.
So is that First Street reconstruction considering, not only First Street, but also 10th and 11th avenues?
It has been, so that's First Street basically from the library to the end heading to the west, all to 11th Avenue. So all of that's 8 blocks. And then 10th and 11th Avenues between 1st and 2nd Street have been generally included in that as well. But what we don't know is what about 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th Avenues between Highway 61 and 1st Street? And what about those avenues between 1st Street and 2nd Street, and 2nd Street and 3rd Street? We haven't included most of that in our thinking about this before, but now, it's going to be 2020, and we might be doing it in 3 years. It's time to just revisit and make sure we get all the pieces in there that we want.
So if we talked about those other avenues between Highway 61 and First Street, then that number would probably go up to reflect that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and somewhere within those 5 years, I would hope somehow, between us and the county, we can make a decision on 4th Avenue West above 5th Street. That needs repair. And I don't want to leave it for 5 more years.
Yeah.
No,
That's
so
an interesting one to add for consideration.
there's other Fourth Avenue blocks where the condition is pretty poor right now too. And that block you're talking about, where we don't currently have utilities planned to be replaced, and there isn't currently pavement on most of it, we're probably not looking at a project of this scope.
Right.
And so we're not including it on a 5-year capital improvement plan, but that doesn't mean we're not going to do something in the next 5 years up there. I mean, we've already begun that conversation with the county and expect that to be part of the street service agreement conversation that we're having with them. Okay, the last piece of this that we sent out was the equipment replacement schedule.
This one's big.
If you tried to read this on your phone, good luck. I'm sorry about that. If you tried to read it on a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper, forget about it. You don't really need to study this in detail tonight. Take your time and study it in detail at your leisure. This is the entirety of our replacement schedule. So just to describe the concept, each of these rows is a vehicle that we own that's significant enough that we're trying to think about its replacement plan. We try to describe what it is. We give it an estimated life. We give it an estimated replacement cost. And then it's just simple math. That's how much per year we need to be making sure we're setting aside so that when it's time to replace it, we're replacing it with cash. And then the simple math again, when did we buy it? How many years do we expect to keep it? Is when does it get up on the replacement schedule? Being on the replacement schedule at a particular time does not mean a piece of equipment gets replaced at a particular time. So our breaker, this is our hydraulic breaker attachment that we put on our backhoe. We bought it in 2004. At that time we said, that's probably a 15-year life on that piece of equipment. If we used it 20 times a year, it probably wouldn't have lasted 15 years. We don't need it terribly often. When we do, we're super happy we have it, but it doesn't need to be replaced now, so we're not going to replace it in 2019.
But we're still accounting for it.
We are going to set aside this amount every year, and it's not accumulating in a bank account, but it is in the street department budget. That their expense
So-
budget covers this replacement amount.
So could that spreadsheet be, what's my word? It's the end of the day. Not redone, but just recalculated so it would show everything that together that's going to be replaced in 19, 20. And if something's not going to be replaced in 19, I'd rather see it moved over to when they think that it would be.
We don't know when right now, and so we could pick another time. One of the reasons I didn't do that is because the easiest way to change it would be to change this number here, the 15-year lifespan, and say, well, maybe it's a 20-year lifespan, but then that reduces their annual budget, and that may not be realistic. Now, for a piece of equipment that we say is going to cost $12,000, it doesn't matter, right? We could say it's 50 years or 2 years, and it's not going to change the big picture that much. So that's why I left that one in there.
Yeah, I don't even,
What happens to the, sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
oh, I'm not, and it's different for everybody. Maybe it's other people need more information. I'm not as interested in the life or even kind of what we're setting aside for it, since I know that that's what you're doing in the office. What's more important to me is what is it that we're looking at and seeing, even a 5-year schedule of what are we really expecting that we would replace? And that may be a conversation that department heads have with you prior to coming up with this. This is just, as I tried to read it, it's really convoluted. I mean, everything fits together. I understand it, so convoluted is probably not the right word. But in trying to hone in on what the council needs to see, I think it would be easier to see something that says, really, truly, here's what we're looking to replace in 2020. Even if it doesn't fit the schedule, because something could break that we say, you know what, we have to replace this, whether the money's all there or not.
There's maybe a little bit of a difference in what I'm using this for and what you want to use it for.
Okay.
And so what I'm using this for is this.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Just to
And
make sure it's the
is
safety.
And these
this.
numbers, yeah.
So what we want to
Okay.
know is how much do we need to put in our annual budget every year? So that's kind of a policy level planning tool.
Got it.
And the other thing we want to know is if we generally replace these things on a schedule like this and we're planning on using cash, are we going to have enough cash in any given year to do that?
Okay.
So this is not intended to be asking permission to replace anything or saying we're going to. All those conversations are going to happen separately.
Oh, okay.
So when we come and say it's time to replace a truck, which we just did, right? We came in and said we're going to replace this street truck.
Yep.
Then we're going to bring that case to you individually and say, you know, we had a schedule, but more importantly, it's in the department's opinion, the condition is at a level where it needs to be replaced based on whatever factors they have to offer. And then sometimes that's like this was actually pretty close to what we thought it was going to be. 10 years for a heavy-duty piece of equipment that we're plowing snow with is a pretty good life. Whereas something that's a larger truck that the electric department's using,
Yeah,
for instance,
they're on
they've
20, 40-year schedule.
yeah, they've got a this Chevy Bucket 60. Well, we didn't even buy it with the intention of we bought it used, right? We're not going to replace it with a new one, so it's not on the schedule at all. The digger truck, for instance, that says 1999, and we had it in there at 20 years, and so it was showing up on the replacement schedule for this year. But we're not going to replace it. We're going to keep it, and we think we can probably keep it for a while. So we just changed it to 25.
So when you do, so if we, I guess that's my question is, so if there are a series of things that are coming up to the replacement date in their life cycle and they're not being done, is the amount that's amortized out over their lifespan to be into the budget, does that number continue to add in those subsequent years when
Beyond.
it isn't being replaced? So do we keep, if it's $300 a year that we need to put into the budget to account for whatever the thing is
Right.
over its 20-year lifespan?
Yes,
If we don't replace it, do we keep putting that $300 in?
yes,
Okay.
we do. So we're not, we might change what this number is. We'll make it 0 if our intention is not to replace it.
Right.
But if our intention is to replace it, but we're just not ready yet, we're going to keep accumulating that money in the annual budget to fund the replacement schedule.
At the full cost, or can it be lowered because the actual?
Well, this one's lowered now, right? So it used to say 20, and so it was up here at 108,000 for 20 years,
Oh, because if you
and now
extend
it's
the-
25, so we've lowered it.
Because you're
Okay.
dividing it straight out, so
Yeah.
then you take the percentage. I got you.
I mean, the other thing that happens is these prices are occasionally updated. They're not current. Every one of them, I wouldn't say right now is a realistic current price. But the more important pieces where we know they're coming up for a replacement, we look at those prices and try to update them and make sure they are current. So for instance, that street truck was in there at 35 for a very long time. And now that we know what the price is, it's 50.
Yeah.
This is the total replacement cost that's estimated based on these prices for our entire fleet. So just to give you an idea of how significant our fleet is in terms of an asset, it's a lot of money to replace it all tomorrow. This, if we start at $75,000, just as a thought exercise that we've set aside right now, that's all we have to set aside right now to pay for fleet replacement, and we've got this much in the annual budgets, and we're spending this much, and so we add this in and take this out, and it gets to here. We add this in and take this out, and it gets to here. So basically, we're looking at an annual basis and saying, starting with 75, it stays pretty close to that. It goes down to 50, then it's up to 120 because nothing's scheduled for replacement. It goes to 130. Then we finally do replace that bucket digger derrick truck, and now it's down to 30, 38, 16. But as you can see, it never goes below 0. As a matter of fact, it's pretty stinking high at the end of this schedule, which is okay because there's two things on here that you're not going to see, which are those fire trucks, which are right now, 40 years we're saying we're going to keep them because those are two that we bought brand new. We keep good care of them. We don't use them at a very high rate.
Firefighting
So-
technology probably won't change significantly.
Well, I mean, we have no idea.
Well,
We have no idea in 40 years, and it doesn't matter. But we do know that at some point in the future, we're going to have to get a new fire truck, and it's going to cost a lot of money. So it's okay that at the end of that schedule, it starts to accumulate. It's also 20 years in the future, and this is really only useful for, again, this year, which is what that is, and the near-term future. Are we going to be able to fund this operation with cash? So that's how we're using it.
So all of this 2019, 2020, 2021, blah, 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 all the way out to 2038. So that basically answers to a certain extent what you were wondering, which is to see when things are scheduled to be replaced. So if you wanted to condense that and make that a little bit easier, it seems like you could just add one column over on the left here. It says, year purchased, make, model, color, life, then just add another column and just add, the 2003 to the 25
well,
year
even
lifespan.
if
And
I
then
wanted to, if I really wanted to, I could say, Mike, send me the live spreadsheet.
Yeah,
And I could go in
Yeah, you
and
can do that too.
I could rearrange and go, okay, what really are we looking at replacing?
I wouldn't recommend
in the next
it.
3 years.
This little cell that says 12,000 here is actually about a 40-line
Right.
formula.
It's linked to everything.
So
Yeah.
it's because I want it to just
God
work
bless Excel.
automatically, right?
Right.
And so it does that really
Punch
nicely
numbers
right
in and
now.
away it goes. Yeah.
The other thing that I don't want you to focus on what are we going to replace when, because that's not how we replace things. I want you to focus on what our policy is, which is we plan for the replacement of our equipment, we keep it in good condition, and when it's time for it to be replaced because of our needs have changed or the condition merits it, that's when we come and ask to replace it. And that means sometimes it's faster than we thought, and sometimes it's slower than we thought. And that every time we're going to talk about replacing a piece of equipment, we bring that to you to talk about it. So that's our policy. And that's better in my mind than looking at here's the schedule, are we happy with that or not? We've made a statement about our fleet, which is this is what we need to do, what we're doing. And anytime we want to change our fleet, we want to talk about that with you as a separate question than do we have enough money to replace it.
So when does it come before council? Is there a dollar amount policy? 5, 10?
Yeah, 10 is
3?
kind of what we usually look at. It depends. When it's equipment replacement, we're going to show you all that stuff that's an actual vehicle. And if it's a trailer or something, we probably won't bother. If that breaker piece of equipment, we'll probably tell you it's time to replace it. There's not a lot of policy decision involved in that, other than the way we're operating, we think we want to own one, and so the question would be, well, do you want us to rent one instead? Do you want to look at those options? But at that amount of money, it's probably not worth spending a lot of our time on.
Right, I just knew
And I
in
think-
former stuff, and a board or a council goes by what's being recommended anyway, for the most part, unless we want to go tear it apart, which is not something I want to do, but.
And I hope that you're comfortable with the policy, the way it's set up to operate, which means that when we do come and ask you, you understand why, and you're happy with the planning that's occurred, and so that you would say, yes, that makes sense to me, we want to approve that.
Do we have it in writing?
The policy?
Mhm.
We actually do, yeah, I'd be happy to
Okay.
send it around.
I- I'm just thinking that's awesome.
I like that a lot better. The county has actually caught a lot of guff in the past several years because of the nature of their policy for replacing stuff, and they actually had hired somebody to do a study to say how are they going to be able to minimize the actual expense of all their equipment, given that they have way more equipment than we do, and so then they assume that the used price that they can get decreases at a certain rate, and the expense of the new piece accelerates at a certain proportion. So then they should sell off and rebuy all of their equipment at these particular points in their lifespan. I am so glad we don't have so much stuff
I
that we
actually,
can just work it until it falls apart and then replace it.
I mean, part of our difference between what we're doing in the county is they do their own maintenance.
Mm.
And so we keep our maintenance generally outsourced, although there's a lot of things that our staff does take care of. But the maintenance of our fleet is not the biggest expense of it, because none of our fleet is particularly heavily used, other than a few of those snow plowing pieces of equipment. So we're kind of in a good place to take a pickup truck that's being used for utility purposes and keep it for 10 or 15 years if all we're doing is moving tools with it, or getting to job sites with it.
Or driving around with the gray truck and hoping it starts.
And the bigger pieces of equipment that we have, the ones where it's really worth your time to do that kind of analysis, what's the resale value going to be? When does the maintenance expense really start to get up there? We don't have a lot of those. We've got a backhoe is probably the most significant thing we've got, or a bucket truck with the electric department. The fire trucks, we don't even have to do that analysis because we know we have to maintain them and we want to keep them a long time until we can't keep them anymore. So, equipment replacement.
What about adding equipment?
When we add a piece of equipment,
You have a provision in there for something comes up, you gotta add a piece of equipment.
yes, and it doesn't happen very often.
No, but I'm just saying.
Well, we did add a
I'm just
vacuum
thinking
trailer.
ahead for snow removal
Yeah.
purposes the next couple of years here. I mean, we're gonna have to, the city's gonna have to do something.
What
Possible.
Lenny will be able to talk to you about when he comes is the investigations we've been doing into sidewalk maintenance
That's the type of
and
equipment.
the type of equipment that we'll need to have if we're going to be really drastically increasing the amount of sidewalk snow plowing that we do. And figuring out, well, what's the best type of equipment to get for that would do the job, but also that we might be able to do other things with, because we hate to have a piece of equipment. It's like, the street sweeper, for instance, the only thing we can do with it is street sweep.
Skid steer.
That's what we've
With
got.
the sweet piece.
We've got the skid steer right now that's doing the maintenance on sidewalks. The problem we have with it is it's 6 feet wide, and not all of our sidewalks are. So there are some pieces of equipment that are designed to do sidewalks, and we'll have to decide, is it worth the investment based on the amount we expect to use it?
Are you waiting for me?
Nope, we got plenty of other stuff.
Timing.
Perfect timing. As a matter of fact, we are done with all of the general overview things I wanted to show you, all the big picture things. And it's time to start looking at line items in budgets. And so if you want to just start with the fire department, as long as Ben's here.
I think I'm probably the simplest one.
You think?
Probably.
Well,
I don't even recognize
I like
it.
that attitude.
That's
Okay.
yours.
This is mine?
Yeah.
Does everybody have, well, these are updated, so I'm going to give everybody a more recent.
A more
version of
recent
this.
version.
Have we heard anything on health insurance stuff yet, Kim?
No,
No.
no. The only thing I've heard is that mid-year came in around 3.71, so he's expecting 4%. Of course, I built a little more in there than that, but we
Just
won't
to
know
be
until
safe.
September.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, I was looking at the numbers that we had in the budget here, and it looked like they had gone up.
That's not bad at all.
I like the picture of the Petri booze bottle as one of the indicative pictures of the city of Granbury next
Best
to
one.
sludge water and
Everything we
Water
do.
and booze.
sludge water and booze. Not much difference. Anyway.
I feel a lot better drinking booze than sludge water, but that's just me.
Haven't tried.
Okay, so here's the fire budget. So we're looking at. What am I looking at?
So the right-hand column is the 2020 proposed expense budget.
We're buying something big, it looks like.
$350 more than this year? Gee, Ben,
Yeah,
where
we're
are
gonna
you,
break the bank,
where are
aren't
you
we?
expending so extravagantly?
I don't think, Kim, have we made like drastic changes to our budget for like how many years now?
Office
It's been a very
supplies.
long time.
Dang.
Just, yeah, I guess your retirement plan, I mean,
Yep.
you kind of look ahead on that, don't you? Who's,
Well, that's PERA,
Yeah.
the state sets all of that stuff.
Right.
You know, as far as how all their investing goes, so that's always kind of a crapshoot, I guess.
Yeah.
But we haven't had to contribute for a few years now.
Right. Maybe you want to talk about the number of calls.
Yeah, that was something else that we had last year, was, we had a record number of calls.
That's what I heard.
Like 65, I think, last year. We usually run about, historically, like 35 or 40. So there's definitely a little bit of a trend kind of picking up of more fire calls.
Were those actual fire calls, or those
No.
fire and
No.
medical response?
Mostly
calls?
medical calls, and a lot of those fire calls were ambulance assist kind of calls, as far as needing a driver or lift assist or something like that, because of
We're working on that.
the ambulance being, having their staffing issues. But that seems to have kind of corrected itself, I guess, lately. But we're still on track for having another busy year.
Fair enough.
But I think we only had maybe 5 or 6, maybe only 5 actual like fire calls, car accidents and that kind of thing.
So weren't there repairs needed to the actual building itself?
The roof has been leaking,
Yep.
and I still haven't quite. I've apologize. I've been super busy the last couple of weeks, so I haven't got to follow up where we're at with that.
We've been looking at different repair options versus replacement options and trying to decide if we need to also make changes to the HVAC system, which would affect the number of holes we're poking in the roof. And so
This is a steel building.
rather than just fix the leaks with, tube of caulk and move on, there's actually other kind of longer term maintenance needs that we're looking at taking care of at the same time. And I don't think we've got that quite figured out yet.
So none of that's really planned for next year yet?
Well, no, I think we would intend to do it in the next, 6 to 12 months. So
Something needs to be done.
Yeah.
A decision needs to be made. Like Mike said, there were some different options, and there's the grand option, and then there's kind of the just keep moving along kind of option, I guess. And I would go for the just kind of keep moving along option, I guess, if I had any input on it. It's a 20-year-old building that's lasted this long. It's a metal building, so replacing a whole metal roof to me doesn't seem quite right.
the keep moving along price wasn't a lot cheaper. It was adding a coating to the metal roof that was supposed to close up any of the leaks. And
So what's the other prices? The other price you're saying, like the Cadillac plan there would be?
yeah, I wouldn't call it that. I wouldn't call it the grand plan either. They're both just get along plans. And the question is, when do we need to replace HVAC equipment? And if we need to do that in the near future and it's going to affect the roof, we might as well do them at the same time. So that's what we're trying to evaluate. Not, do we want to upgrade this to something fancier than it is? We're definitely planning on just moving this along in its current condition, just
But are
trying to
we-
keep it maintained.
Do we have enough space for our needs, or have we outgrown it in 20 years?
The space isn't an issue. We're not, we're not adding on to the building or any type of that. This is just kind of, from what I have been told is the screws that are holding the metal down, the washers dry out.
The
And then they
rubber.
crumble.
The rubber
That's
crumble
not
and
a,
breaks.
that's
That's indicative
it's
of
not
metal.
seamless.
No.
Okay.
Right.
So
So
they-
the one option was to replace the screws and throw this coating over top of it
Right.
to seal the roof. The cheapest option, which I am for, would be to just simply replace the screws with the different washers
Yeah,
on
new ones
them.
with
Yep.
washers.
Fix the rubber boots for, well, Craig, you know how those are. There's 3 heaters in that main bay there that each have their own vent going through the roof.
Yeah, with a rubber boot on it.
And those rubber boots are dried out and broken, especially on the south-facing side.
Right.
So those would need to be replaced, and then maybe I put a diverter on there to maybe help, keep them from getting beat up by the ice a little more.
And we're talking about doing that soonish. And
Well,
so-
it needs to be done because the roof is leaking.
Yeah, okay.
I mean,
So the
so something needs to be done, whether we replace these all of the heaters in there, like Mike said, and go with all this whole new system, or we just replace the
that-
screws in the boots, and it's lasted 20 years already. Why shouldn't it last another 20 years?
So with the leaking, are we having drywall damage inside
There's
of
no
things?
drywall in there.
No, it's all metal.
It's all metal.
Yeah, but
Drywall in the office area.
Is it
Drywall in
insulated?
there.
Is it
Underneath
insulated
the-
with fiberglass, like just fiberglass pads? Is that something
I
we
would
have to worry about?
assume so, yes. I haven't been in the
Yeah,
attic.
be something
I
to
think it
check.
was,
Anyway, stay tuned.
We're-
We're still gathering information. We'll come with options
It's
and a
still built.
recommendation.
Does the fire department have a like a reserve fund like all the other departments do? So this is something that comes out of general operating.
This is just general fund money here we're talking about.
Mhm.
So.
Okay.
Okay.
Is the heating with just, I'm sorry, minutia. Is it like those hot dog like forced air heaters?
So
Propane.
it's just propane, you know, like a radiator
Modine heaters.
for, you
Yeah,
know,
like-
like a space, big
With the fan and blowing.
fan and
air,
blower,
and
yeah.
everything.
They're fairly simple. I mean,
Sure.
there's really not much that can go wrong with them things.
Right, totally, and they last for a long
Burner
time.
box.
They last for quite a long time, so,
Yep, a burner in a box fan, I like that.
yeah,
That's
that's
it.
pretty much what it is.
I replaced mine for 25.
Yeah, I mean, what could happen to them is there's no electronics. I mean, the firebox can eventually rot away. I mean,
Okay.
it's actually a fairly simple and easy heating method that,
So we know that that's coming, so we'll be prepared for that.
Mhm.
So a couple other things on the budget here. It looks like there's a big capital outlay going for equipment this year that's scheduled for 2020.
It's not different. So
It's the
look
same?
at 2017 and 18 actuals.
Mhm.
We didn't buy anything that we capitalized.
Gotcha.
But we had that number in the budget because, again, we're setting aside a decent chunk for the equipment replacement schedule we just looked at.
Okay.
We're also setting aside money to pay for replacement gear for the firefighters, and we're also setting aside money to pay for building improvements.
So these
So
are
all
actual-
those things are included in that 43 number. And we don't spend it all every year. As you can see, there's some years we don't spend any of it.
Mhm.
But we're going to spend it this year and next
we're
year.
gonna, we're gonna
So-
spend some of it this year. We've got some more turnout gear we need to buy. We need to air packs are coming to the end of their scheduled use, I guess you could say. And then building and all of that kind of stuff. I think last year and this year too, we're slowly getting into the process of maintaining and replacing some of our high ticket items like turnout gear and all of that stuff that's set by NFPA rules and stuff like that for replacement that, to be perfectly honest, is silly to small departments like us, but when OSHA comes in and they see turnout gear with dates on it that's outdated, then they get cranky and start handing out fines.
Cranky
So-
pants. So you're saying, if I'm assuming this correctly, because we only have the budget amounts for 2019 and 2020 on this worksheet, that the budget amounts for 2017 and 2018 were around that $100,000 mark as well, and that the difference between those two went into the capital outlay savings that we've set up.
Some of it, yeah, the majority of it, but there were other deviations and just straight up line items. You can see the operating supplies was 5,700, then 1,100, then 2,400, and so it's a planning tool to do a budget like this, and then you can see there's quite a bit of deviation in the actual spending.
And that probably is a lot of coding, I guess, is to,
So the capital outlay covers most of your needs, is what you're saying, and that anything else that you might need is already covered in a different line item that's sufficiently funded. So there's, as far as funding is concerned, you don't see any glaring exclusions or anything like that.
In terms of fleet, I know we've started talking about whether that recent ladder truck purchase is ready to be
yeah,
considered for replacement.
right, and like we discussed when we bought that ladder truck, that we're not gonna replace it with a $1 million piece of equipment. We'll probably, when that comes to become more of a pressing issue, we'll be looking for used, just like we found this one. And the same with that support truck that we have. Aaron works with the DNR, well, he works for the DNR, so he's been kind of watching their cash to possibly replace that with something a little more updated and possibly a little more useful. But those will be, you know, $10,000 items, not $100,000 items.
Fair enough. Does anybody else have any questions about the fire budget? I see on the back, we've got the revenue worksheet, and so that's kind of pretty self-explanatory.
We have a contract with the county, and this is just a funding mechanism. There's not a, they do this, we do this sort of thing, but our service territory extends quite a bit outside the city limits. And the way we divide that expense budget up is based on the valuation outside versus inside and the number of calls outside versus inside. Those are the two major factors, and the number of calls averaged over 5 years. So it's kind of swung back and forth between a little more than half coming from the county, a little more than half coming from the city. It's now a little more than half coming from the city. So you can see that we've got 47,470 was the 2019 budget item that the county's levying into that extraterritorial area that they send to us. And that's what's in there for 2020 right now, but obviously we don't really know yet. We have to gather some more information. I still don't have the valuation numbers from the county, and we don't have the latest call numbers to put in there yet, but we'll get that figured out before September.
So here's
Does
another.
does that formula, seem to still serve us well? I mean,
I think it makes a lot of sense. It's explainable, and you have to have some kind of rationale. And I think valuation is trying to represent the potential need for service, and then the actual cause is trying to represent what happened. So I think it makes a lot of sense to keep going that way.
well, it just seems that as long as we're talking about evaluating some of the other city-county agreements, this might be one, too, that we might want to just...
I don't think so. I mean, this is just about funding. It's not a service agreement, other than to discuss, tell the county how they can levy those properties that we're providing service to.
I mean, if you think it's reasonable, then I don't think we have to do anything about it, but, because we don't know whether it is or isn't,
Yeah.
I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, that formula is above my pay grade. I've never really understood how it all works.
And eventually, do we look at what we pay them, what they pay us, and somehow try to find some in-between so we're not passing paper back and forth, so to speak?
Well, this one's different because it's only a portion of the county that's paying this. So it's not like
Okay.
Cook County's paying City of Grand Marais. It's those properties that are being serviced by the Grand Marais Fire Department.
That's what I was
The
wondering.
county is levying on our behalf so that those properties contribute to that fire
Directly
protection.
to our.
Yeah,
fire.
my only question is just whether or not the agreement is working.
Yeah, I think it's working okay. And because it floats around that 50-50 number, and the valuations stay pretty close, and the number of calls goes back and forth a little bit.
Any other questions?
Just numbers, right?
$50,000 to have a fire department really is not an expense I'm gonna worry about. I'm not losing sleep over
Well, and that
having
was, you weren't on the council yet when we had the conversation about bumping up the relief fund number, because it used to be, like, we bumped it up relatively significantly. so
Yeah,
that
it was a
matched
big jump the last
Lutzen
time
one.
we did it.
And it hadn't been bumped up for a while, I think. And the council was just kind of like, yeah, we need to take care of these guys because they're kind of the guys that are going to take care of us. It was not a hard argument.
That's
to make.
the policy conversation to have. I mean, we have a paid-on-call department, meaning that basically the folks that are responding, we're paying them, but it's not a lot. It's a volunteer group. We're not calling them volunteers because they get paid, but we're counting on people being willing to be helpers, and you can't possibly pay them enough to have it be just about the money, but it's nice to have at least some part of it be attractive about the money.
Absolutely.
Right.
And they get a dinner once a year.
Once a year, we pay for that.
But it's not out of this
That
budget.
comes out.
Yeah.
It's all right. It's okay. Again.
Wait a minute, where's the line item for that?
$50,000
Where's the line item for that one?
They got the Relief Association.
Okay.
So, Cool. Anything else you guys have for Ben? You guys have anything else
Thank
that you
you
feel
very
like we need
much,
to point
Ben.
out?
We have lots of other stuff we're gonna point out.
Well, I know, but not with fire.
Not with Ben, no.
Not with
Thanks.
me? I'm free to go?
Yeah. Thanks, man. You even
Get
put
on
on
jail
great.
card.
You even put on the fire department shirt. I like that. Keeping it real.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See ya,
Ben.
Ben.
Thanks
Have
for
a
all
good
your
evening.
work.
You wanna stay?
All right,
Okay, so-
line items for some of the general departments. There's not another department head that's gonna come talk to you about them.
We spend $25,300 on salaries for the council. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I had a thought on that, but the public would string us up.
Well, and I've had that thought too a couple of times, because there are times that I put in a lot of time for doing this, and we all spend a lot of time looking through the council packets and stuff. But my thought is that there is no requirement about how much work you have to do as a counselor or as the mayor or anything like that. So if we up the money for that, then is it going to be about serving the community, or is it going to be about something else? And that's the thing. Like, if it got to be a fair amount of money to serve on the council, then it would, in this community, there's a chance that it could be viewed as a pretty good part-time job, like that kind of a thing. And that's something that I'm just not willing to go there. And plus, I'm not doing it for the money. So, anyway, interesting conversation nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't recommend you talk about changing it unless we continue to have difficulty getting candidates. And this is one of the reasons why that is. My suspicion right now is that the money is not why we have some difficulty getting candidates from time to time, and it's all about the experience instead. But you probably know that better than me, so
You just need more party
Actually,
subs.
well, I think part of it is people that own businesses, if they live within the city, are very hesitant to get involved because it can affect their businesses.
True.
I hear from people, and I know I'm struggling, that as somebody who works full-time for someone else, and even trying to accommodate and get some things done, and as people text and call about stuff that I really have no idea, I know I want to look at it, and I don't know where to find the time. It bothers my conscience a lot, and I don't know where to fit in those times and to answer to people. So I think as people get into this or figure out what it takes, and again, I don't know what amount of money would fix it, because I don't think it would, and I don't know, I don't think any of us are here for the money. So, yeah, it's a,
I don't think this amount has been changed in 15 years.
Since I've been on the council,
well, we've never changed it, have we?
18 years
At
hasn't
one
changed.
point, they got an amount plus a stipend per meeting, and then they changed it.
I think that was before me even. I don't remember a stipend per meeting.
I think it was maybe
It's been a long
2000
time.
that
Been a long time.
changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's reasonable to talk about that amount going up at some point, but as you can see, this is not a big piece of the overall big picture
No.
of the budget. The other things that are included in there, we've got transportation money set aside. It was at 3,000 pretty regularly, but as you can see, it's been hard to spend that. That's there for you if you want to go to training. And again, this isn't something where we're sticking to a line item religiously. That it's super important that if you can find the time and you have some interest, that you feel free to go and get some help with training. So don't let this be a barrier to that. I suspect it's not what the issue is. Again, it's more about what you were talking about, Kelly. It's just a big time commitment.
yeah. Do we know what, and I hate to beat it up, but without having a whole big audience as I peruse it, do we know what other councils do? I mean, would it even, not even to say, okay, we want $50 more a meeting, because I don't know how you define it, but do other councils do, or maybe or boards, where you have your set amount and then you decide to add just a percentage to it each year?
You can't do it that way.
Okay.
The law talks about you setting salaries. Whenever you make a change that increases the salary of the council, it's not allowed to take effect until after the next election. And you have to do it by ordinance. So you couldn't pass an ordinance that said it just goes up 3% a year.
Okay.
Each change has to be done, and then it can't take effect till after an election. So the state law makes it very cumbersome, difficult to do, and I think for a good reason.
And very politically untenable.
Mhm.
It's on a lot of
Yeah.
situations.
Yep, I can
Yeah.
see.
So what this number entails is 6,000 for the mayor and 4,800 for the councilors per year.
For real? I made that much? I didn't think
Yeah.
it was that much.
Yes, congratulations.
Yeah.
I didn't
So-
ever think it added up
You're
to
gonna
that much.
retire sooner than
The
us.
league does a salary survey, and I'm sure they include city council and mayors in that. So if you were interested, you could probably find that on the league's website yourself, or if you wanted us to gather some information someday, we could do that for you too. If you wanted it to be, yeah, he'll do it right now. Terrific. We got what we call the city clerk department, and this pays for some of my salaries, some of Kim's salaries, some of Patrick's salary, some of
Right.
Hayden's salary, but not all of. And then
So
the-
has that percentage changed at all? I mean, for your salary?
Not for 2020. We changed it pretty dramatically, I think, in 18.
Yeah.
And it's been the same since then. That's basically when we created the staffing plan for how we're staffed right now. And it hasn't changed since then. So a significant chunk of all of our salaries is being paid for by the non-general fund departments because we provide service to all those departments as well. That, however, has not yet gone to the library department. They're not contributing significantly to any of our administrative salaries. And so we would love for the county to take over the administration of the library so that they can underwrite that cost instead, or that might be something where we want to talk about that agreement at some point. Or maybe we just start putting it into the budget because there are staff anyway. But otherwise, the electric fund, the water and sewer funds pays a noticeable amount of our salaries because, well, they're a big chunk of our budget and our operation. The rest of those 100 code numbers, we'll talk about employee pay health separately, but they're all just percentages of the salaries that we've got in there. The
Okay.
employee paid health, of course, is based on our new idea with the public employee insurance plan through the state. And it's funny, I just saw on a listserv today another city that was struggling with 20+% increases, and somebody suggested they look at the PEIP, and somebody else said, well, but it's more difficult. And I thought, yep, that sounds about right, but boy, is it worth it in the end. The startup costs for us were fairly high, particularly for our high user employees, to try and figure out how to operate this new system. And we tried as much to add to their abilities to do that with support, and we're working closely with our agent and with Blue Cross and with PEIP to support people through that, and I think we're kind of through that now. So it's not as easy as the other plans were to use. It takes a little more effort on the employee's part, but it saves so much money, including their money that they're putting in their pockets instead of paying for these premiums, that I think it's worth it, and I suspect most of them do too.
So, Kim, you were saying, how much did you budget for an increase in here for the next year? I'm just saying, looking at the numbers here.
Yeah. I put in a 6%
6%?
increase.
Okay.
So that's one of two variables that affects this number. The other variable is there's still a significant price difference between an employee who's opting for single coverage and an employee who's opting for family coverage.
Mhm.
That's something that we try to plan for, but obviously we can't predict. We don't even know who our employees are always going to be. We don't know what their circumstances are going to be. So that's one of the risk factors that's always kind of built into our expense budget. That even with this new plan that doesn't cost as much, it's still a real significant jump from single to family.
So that's all the stuff for city.
The rest of the stuff in the city clerk is really just operating the office. So when we're talking about supplies and such, we're talking about supplies for the city hall office area. Elections is an every other year expense, but at least now this 7 is being put in there as we're planning on spending 14 every 2 years. We only get billed every 2 years when an election happens, but maybe we'll just start putting this in half every year instead, just as a more accurate depiction rather than having a little waiver in the.
So you're saying instead of having a 2019 budget of $10,000, you're doing 2 years of 7
Yeah,
to cover it.
that's where we're at with this first draft.
And do we know, I mean, have we talked to Brady about what he anticipates the expense to be?
You can see it was 9,800 and then it was 12,500, and that he has a lot of variables too in terms of what it ends up costing, and
Mhm.
particularly if there's
Recounts.
recounts.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
last time.
instance, that stuff costs money, and if it's a really close race like we had a number of, then that's money that the government pays.
And lo and
rather than
behold, what happened anyway.
Same thing.
But it's a good process,
outcome.
and it's worth paying for. I mean, this is the absolute basis of how we're running our government, so.
Meeting them both here.
I know.
Yeah. Next page, financial administration. We haven't scheduled our audit report in person, and after the way it happened last year, I gotta admit, I'm a little afraid to. We did suggest to our auditors that they had to do a really good job this time, because we didn't particularly think it went well on the over-the-phone report last time. This is in there, assuming everything's gonna be the same, but I don't actually assume that anymore, that this is the firm we're always gonna use, and I wonder if now is not the time to think about that. Probably not for the 2019 audit that they'll do in 2020, but maybe
Going out
after
for
that.
bids for 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
City attorney, the civil piece of that is what we pay Chris. We've got it in there at 18. You can see it wasn't quite that in 2017. It was quite a bit less in 2018. 2019, we're tracking again to be less than that. This is a number that's entirely unpredictable. There's kind of a baseline that we assume based on the number of hours he spends in meetings, but that's up to you all as well, of course. And then the time that I spend with him, we have regular meetings as well. But then it's all based on what work we ask him to do. And he's been really judicious in the way he uses that time, and I've been super happy with the work that he's done and the prices that we get from his firm. And it's not just Chris, it's his entire firm, and he's got experts in a lot of different fields that we've tapped into.
And this is just for the city
Just the
side,
civil,
well, the city side, not the public utilities side.
this is just the city side, that's right. The
So-
public utilities, he doesn't have any regularly occurring
Right.
participation.
But he's had some,
When the public utilities has issues that they need help with, that's coded to their departments separately.
Yep.
Other general government, that's kind of an innocuous.
how about the criminal attorney?
We've just moved it to be next to the law enforcement so that it's all
Okay,
included
that's
in the
why
same department
it's
budget.
going up in there.
Okay.
I think I circled it somewhere else.
Yeah, 12.5 is what it still is.
Yeah.
The other general government, we've got what we're calling engineering fees, but you might recognize this number as special projects or council priorities. That's where it lives in the line item side of this. Safety Assistance Program, we contract with MMUA to provide us expertise and backup in that on a monthly basis, and we're still happy with that program. Service agreements, that's probably our finance software, is it, don't you think? What else would we include in there?
Yeah, it would be that. I think that's most of it.
That's just our ongoing annual payments for service agreements. We don't have a lot of them. We've got ordinance publication in there now. That's a special project, obviously, but we'll be coding it to that when we make the changes, when we do the work, so we can track the expenses for that separately. Insurance, our general liability insurance, you just approved the bill, you know it's 70,000, and some of it is,
7,000, not 70, right?
no, it's 70.
Oh.
and
The total bill.
But the
Oh.
piece of it that goes towards just general government is this,
Okay.
and then we code each individual department with its own price based on all the risk factors, and they offer that breakdown to us. Membership dues, this is city membership dues, so the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, League of Minnesota Cities. I'm not sure if we're members of anything else right now. In the past, we've
I
been
think the
Association of Small Cities
Parks
as
and
well.
Trails.
We do the
or
Parks and
Oh,
something.
Trails
yeah,
Council.
Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails, that's the other one.
The first couple of years that I was mayor, I got all these great letters from all of these different organizations being like, "Hey, you should be a part of our thing." And I brought him all the mic and was like, "Well, what do you think?" And he was like, "We're getting all this stuff for free anyway, so I probably don't need it."
The league is great for almost all of our needs. The coalition does a really good job of advocating, lobbying for issues that are important to cities, and talking about some that are of interest to us. The Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails, and obviously that's kind of a current event with us and some of the projects we're talking about. Some of the other ones are a bit redundant, and so we've dropped out of them. And they can always come and make their case to you if they would like to see your membership back. A lot of these other items in here are just one-time projects where we have to code the expense and revenues somewhere, and so they end up in this department, but we're not budgeting for any more.
So how about
those
like
things.
the fireworks, will we pay for it, seems like we pay for it some years, we don't pay for it other years,
We
I
pay
did-
for it.
I just moved this one here so you could see it. The Lions actually pay for it, so that comes in as a revenue on the clerk's reimbursement.
So we pay the supplier, the Lions reimburse
Okay.
us dollar for dollar,
So we're just being.
which is why we don't budget it as an expense.
Fiscal agent for that.
Yeah.
And that's the same with some of these other ones, like
Yep.
North Shore Health Grants and.
Yep, that's right. And so then these are either actual special projects that you prioritized and we spent some of that money on, or there were a fiscal agent passing money through. Planning and zoning, this is a chunk of my salary and the associated relevant things.
Which is pretty much all of
And
it.
Patrick.
And Patrick's salary, yeah, we've added that in.
Yeah.
And we don't really have a lot of other stuff in here, so when we do have special projects that are related to planning and zoning, we're relying on that other general government piece to fund some of that stuff, but we do code it down in there when they're just absolutely related. So for instance, the housing work that we're doing right now, we could include it down there, we could have it up here, but as long as it's labeled clearly and you can find it, that's all that matters.
So basically, what I'm seeing is that the increase, the $5,000 increase from the 2019 to 2020 budget in planning and zoning is all salary. Like that's all, probably all.
Most of it
The
is
function of
employee
adding-
paid health, actually.
Yeah,
That's where the
health
biggest
insurance.
chunk of that
Yeah.
increase comes from. And that, again, that just has to do with what type of coverage people are taking. And
Right.
Police administration, this one, I mean, we know where we stand on that. This is where it is. I don't think we're planning on making changes to it next year based on our conversations with the county, but we should expect that to, when we're talking about the budget next year, to be something that we'll need to spend a little more time on. And then there's some other transfer stuff here. This is where we put the expense money for the library, for instance. That's all of our expense side. We'll zip over to our revenues. Here's the property tax levy piece, the 667. Here's where it lives. We do have a tiny amount of special assessments that we're getting that are just general special assessments. Electric franchise fees, the 40,000 plus 1.5% that we've talked about as an issue. Liquor licenses stay pretty level. Other permits and licenses and such are all in here as well. They're not big pieces of revenue for us, and they fluctuate pretty dramatically, but not to an extent that we need to worry too much about them. Here's LGA. Notice that it's up a little tiny bit. That's kind of a rarity. We've mentioned this before. LGA, it's due to some really great work by our legislators that there was some increase to this. This number used to be a lot higher. For us, it was $300,000 when I started here. So my faith in this is not where it was before. And this is always a risk factor for us, that a new state legislature is going to come in and see this as an opportunity. And so it's nice that it's there now, but it's always a risk factor. City Hall rent revenue, that is just a place where we try to collect money from the other funds for the use of City Hall and its functions. Let's bump down to, well, we can just probably skip right to the bottom, huh? Transfer from liquor fund, $200,000. This was $120,000 a year for a very long time throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, but they were making more than that, quite a bit more. We bumped it up to $200,000, and now we're making more than that. Someday we may decide we want to bump that up again, but as long as we're in planning for building a new liquor store, it doesn't really serve us to do that. The money either stays in their fund where we use it to pay for the liquor store, or we put it in our fund where we use it to pay for the liquor store. So might as well just hold tight for now.
Here we are.
There you go.
There.
I do have a question that I think it would be good to address is there's been a lot of talk about potential recession and how recession hits local government entities, and that might be something that we should educate ourselves at least about when it comes to budgeting, because that can look real bad.
Next summer will be my recession.
Our great interest rates will
In the summer after.
fall.
Well, it wasn't that long ago
usually
that we
the
had
highway.
one,
That's
so
all
I
it
think that's what's
It'll
causing
be a
it.
forced recession, believe me.
we can certainly just look back and see how our budgets responded in 2007 and 8, and I can tell you that it's much harder for us as individuals than it is for the city as an organization. The property tax is not something that the recession directly affects, and strangely enough, the liquor store and the rec park weren't really affected by it either. It seems like when things go really bad, the liquor store revenue goes up, and then when things go really good, the liquor store revenue goes up. So that's nice.
Suppose
you
people
know.
drink when they're sad and people drink when they're happy.
It seems like, and the rec park was fairly recession-proof too, and it might just be because it was an option that people had that didn't cost quite as much as the bigger vacations that they were planning on. We can't really diagnose it very clearly, but we didn't get hurt that bad those years. So
You know, some of those years with the recession, the last recession, we did try to stick with a very low or no increase levy.
Right.
Just understanding that, you know, the challenges that individuals and businesses have during those times, that, you know, it's not easy.
Right. Cool. Take a break. Take a break.
We'll talk of recession.
yeah, that was depressing.
Well, shit. Take a look at life.
Good afternoon and evening, downtown parking folks.
How are you?
It's nice to see you.
Good to be here.
Chris, can you hear us?
We're going phone free with the attorney if we can make it happen.
Fancy.
Hey, Tim.
Hey there.
How are you?
Good. Go ahead.
Kim, do you know his number?
You saw my message, Jim?
Yep. It is 651.
Give me 1 second.
What to do or how to make the best of that
651.
trail.
259 1902.
Morning there.
Sun came out.
Huh?
The sun came out.
Yeah, when you walk outside, it's fine. All of a sudden, you walk in here and you go, "Whoa!" A lot of
Is
hot
that
air.
usually what it
Apparently,
feels
I
like in here?
It's full of hot air.
I was wondering if you should talk. I just want to see if I can hear you. I can hear him.
It's Patrick's phone. Does he have a microphone on his computer that's muted?
Sure.
If you drive from the lunch to over parking lot and then get on the bus and then you can decide.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll talk with Paul about trying to put together materials, because obviously we're not gonna be able to see the whole trail. And the parts that you see right out there, I mean, while there's
very prudent.
examples of the general construction of the trail, the kind of like outstanding view, panoramic views and that kind of thing. And we might wanna try to, if there's a way to do something at Cascade, short, you know, just show a few slides or something to give an impression of what is out there that they're not going to see. You know, maybe put a map up and.
We can do that, and there's another possibility too. We're having Michelle Pearson.
Yes.
And probably John from the DNR.
Okay.
They're gonna present on engineering.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was, at the last board meeting, said, I'd like time to talk about the expansion of the cement, we're going to environmental things. So, but then I emailed him, reminding him and all that, he says, Not sure if I'm not, put it in there, placeholder, and we might need to pull it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm suspecting they'll need to pull it, and then we could just push you and all.
Yeah, I mean, 10 minutes at the most, I think, just to show some,
Yeah.
Video,
That's good.
information on what, yeah.
Coming together.
Okay, get back to where I need to be here. All right, let's call this meeting to order. 6:34. Everybody's here. Open forum? Anybody? 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 Okay, hearing nobody, closing the open forum, moving to the consent agenda. Consent agenda is typical 3 items, unless someone would like to pull something for consideration or have an amendment to the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as provided. Anybody?
So moved.
There is movement. Is there a second? Motion.
I will second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, so first thing we have on our agenda is a conversation about downtown parking. This is headed up by the Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if you want to come up, Jim, and you may as well.
It's actually Graham Ray.
The Business
Downtown
Coalition
Business
We want our
through
we want
the
our
chamber.
through the
Yeah,
chamber. We're
we'll
under
get you
that
that.
umbrella.
Yeah, because you guys have worked a fair amount on this, so that's good.
Yeah, but we could do it without Jim.
So looking through the memos that you provided, we're looking at a couple of different areas. Like one of those is the rules themselves and how they're codified, and then another is enforcement of those rules and some strategies to get at that. So if that sounds correct, then I'll just let you jump into what your conversation is, and then we can continue it from there. So. I'm sorry?
Can I just say something first?
Sure.
I just want to say that we appreciate that you guys are letting us come in and discuss this. This started off with our business coalition talking about how we were going to deal with the construction on Highway 61, and then it's rolled into other issues with parking, and that was our main concern. So we really appreciate some of the suggestions, too, that have come from council. So thank you. And we really, really appreciate Patrick being a part of our committee, because it's nice to have his insight and his computer and his maps when we need those visuals. So thank you for that.
Visuals are good.
So
We're going to look at some tonight.
The last time we were before you, which was, 6 weeks ago, perhaps, we took away 2 points from that discussion. One was that you were a bit more serious about enforcement than we had assumed in our initial proposal, which was quite modest. And 2, that you would like us to look more comprehensively at Chapter 70. And so we did that. And the first thing you have here is a cover memo that is an update to our recommendations earlier. The one point about enforcement, when we start talking about it, people get a little bit antsy that you will go from none to being really hard cases on this, and so the consensus of the parking committee was that please ease into it and see what works and don't be hard. Especially, I think this came out after we were reviewing the chapters, which we recommend that you delete on skateboards and things. Somebody really had a problem with skateboards at some point, and
As a product of the time.
It
Yeah.
was bad back
Yeah.
then.
so that's the enforcement part. Kelly suggested the 15-minute parking zones. One to really, I think, I think that you had 2 major reasons for that. One was local residents wanting just to get in and out and get something, and second, that if you added some 15-minute zones, it might reduce the need for additional handicap zones. And the parking committee really liked that, and instead of writing a set of those into the ordinance, we made a list of areas where we thought you might consider doing that. And if you want to write them in, fine, or however you want to do that. But one I wanted to especially mention was I talked with Chris Levine about making the entire area from the alley to the corner in front of on the south side of First Street, in front of the liquor store, a 15-minute zone. He really liked that, and especially because he says that there are a lot of trucks pulling boats that get in there, and he'd like to see them move very quickly. And so that was an additional one, and the others you can see there, and we're happy to answer questions about those. Those are all just suggestions. I think the rest of that memo is pretty self-explanatory. The memo that comes next